Meteorologists have been monitoring a broad area of low pressure located several hundred miles off the Cape Verde Islands for 3 days. This morning, the National Hurricane Center, or NHC, has officially classified the system as Tropical Storm Grace, tracking westward at about 15 miles per hour. Weather officials are watching this system closely as they predict the Cape Verde-type storm to significantly strengthen over the next several days as it moves through the open Atlantic and toward the Caribbean. As forecast, Hurricane Grace intensified overnight into a Category 1 storm as it continues its westward march toward the Caribbean. The NHC has stated that conditions are favorable for this system to rapidly intensify into a major hurricane as it approaches warmer waters. The storm's cone of uncertainty engulfs almost the entire Caribbean region, and officials and residents on all islands are on high alert for a possible landfall. Elsewhere, interests along the Gulf of Mexico and the eastern coast of the United States are also monitoring the storm, as the track is still uncertain. Hurricane Grace rapidly strengthened over the past 24 hours, growing into a catastrophic Category 4 storm with 140-mile-per-hour winds. The storm is currently positioned over the Lesser Antilles and is headed straight for the U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and the island of Hispaniola. Authorities throughout the Greater Antilles are scrambling to prepare their citizens for an impending and devastating landfall, as meteorologists warn that Grace could spin into a Category 5 storm overnight. Grace has caused major damage in Guadeloupe, Montserrat, and St. Kitts and Nevis before making a north turn. 41 people have been killed and 23,000 are now homeless. Approximately 85% of all structures in Guadeloupe, Montserrat, and St. Kitts and Nevis were destroyed. Phone lines, power lines, hospitals, banks, and the airports were severely damaged or destroyed. Widespread looting is occurring. Hurricane Grace made landfall as a monstrous Category 5 storm on the eastern tip of Puerto Rico over Vieques at 2 a.m. Northeastern Puerto Rico was slammed with high seas approximately 2 hours later. Sustained winds were clocked at a catastrophic 158 miles per hour. The storm is moving at about 15 miles per hour but is extremely large, and hurricane-force winds were measured in Guayama for more than 12 hours. The storm is producing extremely heavy rainfall, and there is widespread flooding. The mountainous regions of Puerto Rico are seeing upward of 27 inches of rain. In Adjuntas, in the Cordillera Central, and in the Sierra de Luquillo, rainfall is measured over 25 inches, or 640 millimeters, with 29.6 inches, or 752 millimeters, recorded in Adjuntas. Meanwhile, response operations have begun in St. Croix. The island was lashed with a direct hit, and its entire infrastructure is virtually wiped out. Authorities are comparing the devastation to that seen during Hurricane Hugo in 1989. Massive amounts of debris on public roads is impeding rescue operations and making travel on the island particularly dangerous and difficult. More than 95% of the island is without power. The Governor Juan F. Luis Hospital and Medical Center suffered major damage and is operating on generators, but does not have the capacity to treat new patients. Ad hoc medical facilities in parking lots have been set up. Shelters are overflowing, and more residents are seeking housing help as they realize what is left of their homes is uninhabitable. There is widespread looting because of the size of the storm and a last-minute jiggle in the track. St. Thomas, to the north, was spared in comparison to St. Croix. High seas and heavy rainfall caused local flooding there, but no major or widespread infrastructure damage. Hurricane Grace is currently a Category 4 storm as it moves just north of Hispaniola toward the U.S. mainland. Hurricane Grace, still a Category 4 storm, is moving northwest just over the Turks and Caicos Islands in the direction of the U.S. mainland. Maximum sustained winds are at 130 miles per hour. The National Hurricane Center predicts a Florida landfall within the next 48 hours. Authorities throughout the state are rushing to make final preparations, ordering mandatory evacuations, opening shelters, and pre-positioning supplies in anticipation of catastrophic Hurricane Grace. Many Florida residents outside of the mandatory evacuation orders are choosing to voluntarily evacuate, and traffic north and westward is heavy and slow-moving. Though residents were well prepared for the storm, Puerto Rico has been devastated. At least 200 people have been killed, and more than 100 are missing. Heavy rains are causing severe flooding in the vicinity of San Juan. Many of the main roads and bridges have been completely washed away, and many more are impassable. Severe infrastructure damage is widespread throughout the island. Property damage from wind and rain is catastrophic. San Juan suffered extensive damages where reportedly 15,000 houses were completely destroyed. 70% of buildings, including businesses, hotels, schools, and churches, suffered severe damages or were also completely destroyed. Nearly 250,000 people are reportedly homeless across Puerto Rico. The agricultural sector has almost been completely wiped out. Communications are limited at best and have been impacted by fallen trees, landslides, and debilitated bridges. Almost the entire island is without power, and the drinking water supply has been compromised. Lack of power and communications is inhibiting ongoing rescue efforts. Hurricane Grace has remained constant, still a Category 4 storm with 131 mile-per-hour winds. The National Hurricane Center has forecast a South Florida landfall within the next 24 hours. Major interstates and roadways remain slow-moving as last-minute evacuees try to head north and west. State officials are urging residents to shelter in place now and finish any last-minute preparations in advance of this catastrophic storm. Response operations in Puerto Rico continue, though conditions have not improved. Rescue efforts are still underway, and residents there are competing for basic life-saving and life-sustaining supplies, which are limited at best. Officials have warned that the drinking water is unsafe, but communications are still down throughout most of the island. The power grid remains devastated, and authorities warn that it could be several months before the entire island is back online. There is still widespread flooding, which is also inhibiting disaster relief efforts. Hurricane Grace slammed ashore overnight, making official landfall near West Palm Beach, Florida as a Category 4 storm, with winds of 135 miles per hour. Hurricane and tropical storm force winds are felt from Miami to Orlando. Significant flooding is widespread throughout the area, which, coupled with the wind damage, is wreaking havoc on critical infrastructure. Hospitals, jails, fire stations, schools, and police stations within Grace's path suffered damage ranging from significant to total destruction. Luckily, the majority of the traffic cleared before landfall, so most people were able to seek appropriate shelter. The death toll is estimated to be less than 50, according to initial reports. The storm moves directly over Lake Okeechobee later that night. A previous tropical storm system coupled with rainfall throughout the month of August caused the water level in Lake Okeechobee to rise from 15.12 feet NGVD on July 31st to 16.95 feet NGVD on August 31st. Prior to Hurricane Grace, an average of 11.43 inches of rain fell from Orlando to the Florida Keys, representing 152% of the average for the month. The lake level is at 17.55 feet NGVD as the storm makes impact. The eye of the storm passes the lake's southeast corner at 10 p.m. with winds of 150 miles per hour, generating a 13-foot storm surge. Affected towns include Jupiter, Delray, Lake Worth, Pompano, West Palm Beach, and Palm Beach. The greatest devastation may be along the south and north shores of Lake Okeechobee. The high winds and heavy rainfall combined with the abnormally high lake levels produce catastrophic results. Authorities are frantically predicting that the surge will wash over the lake's dike and possibly flood an area 75 miles long to the south and approximately 40 miles to the north as the hurricane passes and the winds shift. The system has slowed significantly and is predicted to track through Florida for the next 24 hours before moving up the eastern seaboard. Hurricane Grace is slowly making its way north after making the predicted turn northeast. The eye of Grace is currently centered over Jacksonville, as the majority of Florida has been battered and beaten by the storm for more than 24 hours. Grace has finally weakened, though it is still classified as a Category 1 storm as it moves through the state. Winds are at 80 miles per hour. After directly crossing Lake Okeechobee, the forward motion of the storm turned northeast, bringing it across northern Florida without losing intensity. At Belle Glade, one of the hardest-hit areas, the floodwaters rose to a height of 2.1 meters or 7 feet at a rate of about 25 millimeters or 1 inch per minute. The inflows to the lake at Kissimmee, Istokpoga, and Fish Eating Creek are still at more than 30,000 cubic feet per second. The surge on the lake caused a breach of Reach 2 near Clewiston and Reach 8 near Buckhead Ridge of the Herbert Hoover Dike, sending 6 feet of water pouring into the town of Clewiston and the town of Okeechobee. The width of breach has expanded to 4,000 feet, with approximately 90,000 cubic feet per second of flows through the breach. On the north side of the lake, the width of the breach expanded to 1,000 feet, with approximately 7,500 cubic feet per second of flows through the breach. With other outflows through St. Lucie and Caloosahatchee rivers, the lake levels are receding at the rate of approximately half a foot per day. The rest of the Florida peninsula has suffered varying degrees of damage. The heavy rainfall and prolonged period of wind and rain that most of the state has seen is causing serious flooding issues and structural damage in numerous cities and counties. As the more southern and central counties begin to assess damage, it becomes clear that state and local resources will soon be overwhelmed. There are more than 50,000 people across the state who are currently in shelters, and a large percentage of them will not be able to return to their homes. Overwhelming amounts of debris are blocking major roadways and waterways. The majority of central Florida counties are without power. With so many downed lines and so much debris, power company officials estimate that it will be several weeks before the power grid is fully restored. Without electrical power, thousands of residents do not have access to safe water supplies, and the numbers continue to rise with additional reports. Communications are disrupted, therefore assistance cannot be requested for those injured. In addition, the water supply has been contaminated as a result of the extensive flooding. A frontal system combined with Hurricane Grace, moving it swiftly up the eastern coast of the U.S. though the storm remained Category 1 strength through Charleston, South Carolina. It finally weakened as it moved through more mountainous North Carolina. Grace is currently moving through central Virginia as a tropical depression. However, rainfall amounts are still significant. The Jacksonville area and coastal Georgia received minimal damage from the system, thanks to early and robust preparations and the weakened storm. There is still extensive flooding in low-lying areas, and about 100,000 residents throughout North Florida counties are without power. Most of Central Florida is still in the dark as well. Local authorities are working hard to clear debris from roadways, but many major roadways still remain impassable. Officials are still advising residents to boil water, as the water supply cannot yet be verified as safe. The Herbert Hoover Dike breach repairs are ongoing. All of the sites will be monitored closely until the lake drops below 15.5 feet. All of the other reach inspection teams reported no new significant findings. Further north throughout coastal South and North Carolina, debris, limited power outages, and significant coastal flooding are all competing for state and local resources. A presidential disaster declaration is likely for several counties in both states, matching the declarations in Florida and parts of coastal Georgia. Internal resources across the South Atlantic Division are growing thin with such a significant response in so many of its districts. Response and recovery efforts throughout the region will be ongoing for the next several months, if not years, in the case of some of the hardest-hit portions of Florida.